Okay, so welcome everybody. We're going to resume our talk that was very unfortunately finished last time. I hope that today, with the private link that I sent to everybody, we can do it better. I tried some other platforms, but unfortunately with all of them, you cannot unmute everybody because the people, you can unmute, but then the people have the possibility to turn their microphones on. So that was a problem. So we'll see how this works. Thanks again, JJ and Dave, for accepting our invitation. And since we have different people, I will suggest that we start from the beginning again. I will skip the introductions because I think everybody knows you too. So I would start by saying that well, before I start with anything else, I have to talk about Juan Matute. Yeah. We were so privileged that we had him a couple of weeks ago with us here. He's such a wonderful young man. He's fighting for his life. I think we're all with him, and all our prayers, independent of our religious beliefs, we're all praying and sending good vibes and thoughts to him and to his family. And we all hope he recovers soon.
Yes.
And that we can have him here again. So, Jay, so let's start talking. We were talking last time about the importance of seat and how it is so related to connection and to proper training, and how having a good seat is the only way that you can accomplish something in dressage in our days. So I would like you to start a little bit with your history on how you started working so much on your seat and what have found you throughout all your years of training and writing and taking lessons and also teaching lessons, how important it is.
Okay, I guess I'll go first.
Yeah. Ladies first.
For me, the seat is sort of the beginning and the end of everything. It's the main tool of communication we have with our horses. And so I always tell my students, if you love your horse, show that by learning to ride really well. And that's by developing a deep, independent seat, something that is very balanced and supple. And I think it's an everyday challenge to work on your awareness of what you bring in your own body to the horse. I always say I love and respect my horses so much that I owe it to them to make sure that I'm at my best. And that's really about, am I balanced? You know, am I supple enough? So many times, a lot of students come to me with problems or issues, and you know, they want to work on the flying change or something, and it always comes down to, you know, how effective is your seat. And so for me, I mean, it's paramount. I still, you know, once every week or once every 2 weeks ride without stirrups. Every trainer I've trained with, starting when I was very young, I worked with Charles DeComfy for 30 years, and he's all about classical tradition. And you know, now my coach, Ali Brock, we still talk a lot about, you know, what I'm doing. Susanna Van Dietz has been a huge influence recently about what are my seat bones doing and where's my leg? I mean, I think the horses, you know, are doing their best to figure out what we mean. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we are as athletic and aware and well balanced in our seat to be able to communicate what we want.
Okay, that's a great introduction. So now, Dave, can you explain to us how did you get into all this training of the position and of the seat, and what has been your experience with this?
Sure. First, I'd like to say thank you, JJ, for that wonderful introduction, because like her, I agree with her that everything starts and ends with the seat. And it really is our responsibility as best we can to keep developing ourselves. And we owe that to our horses, you know, just so that they can keep doing what we want them to do, but also do it happily and stay sound. You know, that's just been my experience, that you can find all kinds of reasons that horses can become unsound. And sadly, sometimes it's the rider's seat, the crookedness or the one-sidedness. It just turns into something not so pleasant for the horse eventually. So in my particular case, I guess I've always been interested in that very thing. So my first horse years ago, 25 years ago, was a broken down thoroughbred, poor thing. We didn't know better when we bought him, but that whole thing got me to start thinking in terms of how do you keep a horse sound. So from there, I ended up with severe injuries, one after the other. I had a fracture in the neck. I had another fall with some issues with the SI in the back. And, you know, there's been other things that at one point I ended up not able to ride for 3 years. So finally, not being able to be helped by chiropractors, osteopaths, regular medicine, I found something called the Feldenkrais Method, which basically rewires the nervous system to find new pathways to go around the injuries and to learn how to be comfortable, sort of a reset of sorts. So prior to injuries and, you know, during injuries, I struggled. I wanted to sit well. My desire was to be good with the horses and be supple. And of course, like everybody else, I always thought of the seat as sort of a static position. But learning with the Feldenkrais method, I started to see things that within this position, there's so much movement. This isn't unlike normal classical dressage theory, where we talk about the movement of the horse coming through us. But learning how to feel all these things just got all my light bulbs going off. And I knew that this was what was first going to get me to be comfortable and ride better. I remember specifically after not riding for 3 years, I used to have trouble with piaffe and passage transitions. There was always a little glitch. And all of a sudden, I'm riding with all this new Feldenkrais information in my body, and that was gone. So that was my first revelation. And of course, I didn't have seat issues, and I thought, okay, it's because I'm not in pain. But past that point, really knowing where your body is, like JJ said, developing that body awareness, where are my seat bones? How can I change things? What works with each other? And then, of course, our seat is only as good as the horse is going underneath us. So to spend that time to figure out how to develop the top line and the mechanics of the horse and how all of that works together pretty much is dressage. So that's my story.
That's great. So in order to guide this conversation, I suggest that we talk beginners first, young people, then beginners, adults, and then the advanced riders, you know, because I think there are different approaches for that. So let's start with the beginners. Young kids or girls, and sometimes when you see them at the beginning, some of them just sit on a horse and they look wonderful. Other ones sit on a horse and they have more difficulties. How do you approach these two cases, and what would you recommend for these beginner riders and for their trainers? Let's go with JJ first.
Okay. I don't work with a ton of beginners anymore, but I do find young people extremely inspiring and really fun to work with. Something that has been really prevalent in my own riding, as well as when I lived in Budapest and trained with Gyula Dalos. He was teaching, I mean, here's this Hungarian Olympian, and he's teaching a lunge lesson to someone, I think she was maybe 9 years old. And I think that's a wonderful place to start. I think it's difficult nowadays to find, you know, stables that have horses and have a program. But I do think, you know, getting a young person extremely comfortable on the back of a horse, that they can do things without thinking about their balance, and that they can get so in tune with the horse's motion. I mean, I know I rode bareback around the pasture many times, which that was not only did I learn about horses and their nature, but I also got really experience with their different movements. And I think, you know, we talked a little bit last time about vaulting. I think anything that can get a rider at the beginning very comfortable on the horse's motion, learning to be in control and aware of what their body is doing. I remember distinctly watching Eula teach this very young girl, and she was needing to unzip her jacket, take her jacket off, put the jacket back on, re-zip it up. And I thought, that has nothing to do with riding, like, you know, but it was because she could think about something totally else while she sat the trot with no stirrups and no rein. So I definitely think that's one of the best places to start. I also grew up dancing. My two older sisters and I, we all went to dance class. We all learned to dance.
That's great.
I do think things like that. Riding is also a rhythm thing. So I find that was also really helpful in, you know, being an athlete and feeling your body and feeling the music. So that's all also good.
Thank you, Dave. And, you know, the same questions, but could you start introducing us to this Feldenkrais method and what is it? And how do you work with that? Honestly, I'm not very familiar, so I'm learning here too.
Yeah, absolutely. So just in relation to the children, it's not widely used with children. The method, most people know it for pain relief. But of course, you have this, so one of the guests from the other day was asking me about it, and she was a skier. So I told her about the Canadian ski team. They use a Feldenkrais practitioner for their Olympic skiers. So you have application within various sports at the highest levels. But now for children, there were cases with cerebral palsy, so developmental issues. So let's just talk maybe momentarily about that hypothetical child that's not so coordinated. So I was actually one of those, a little long and lanky. And if I knew Feldenkrais, I probably would have been able to learn a little bit easier. So what we do is basically use very friendly approaches to do things that are comfortable, not unlike what JJ is saying, that pedagogical approach that make them comfortable, do all different things. So apart from my regular trainer side that says, yes, lunge lessons, vaulting, ride without a saddle, cross training, some cavaletti, all that stuff, getting used to and being comfortable. The Feldenkrais piece, regardless of the age, we have a saying within the Feldenkrais community to make the impossible possible, the possible easy, and the easy beautiful. So as you can see, that fits perfectly with our sport. Or, you know, if you're a dancer, all of these types of things can help you. So you have this application within anything that requires movement and hopefully elegance at a certain point. Yeah, so my son actually is 7 years old and likes Feldenkrais. He's one of the rare children. Of course, he's been exposed to it and he asks for it. We don't push it on children. I have a few young people like JJ. I don't teach a lot of young people. I teach my niece, who's now 13. There's a 14-year-old girl who's very interested in Feldenkrais. She's signed up for my online course at the moment. And yesterday I started another course, and there was a junior rider from Poland, also 14, in the class. So I think once riders are interested, it could be something interesting. Like anything for a young child, I would never force something upon them, even if it's good for them. So if they come to it out of a curiosity and they want to learn and they want to be playful with their learning and see if they can roll around and move this way and that way and all of a sudden stand up and they're taller, or get up and ride their horse and it's easier to turn or do a shoulder in. I had this experience with my niece. She was having difficulty to organize her body into shoulder in, and all of her efforting and trying was turning into, you know, discontortions of the body, which many people have to go through until they get over that. We skip that part with Feldenkrais. We just only do what's comfortable, what's supple, what's easy, connect the dots. The lessons are very slow moving movement explorations. They're not actual exercises. They're to reprogram the brain or to show the brain how to put together different pieces that make the whole puzzle. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, very good. So, JJ, one question I would like to ask is, many times we get advanced riders, and we were discussing this the last time when we got interrupted. And then, you know, of course, everybody wants to get better if they're doing St. George. They want to practice the pirouettes and their shoulder in and the changes, whatever, or if they're doing Grand Prix, their whole concern is about the tempis or Passage Piaffe transitions, whatever. And sometimes you look at them and you see the problem here is the seat. If you're sitting properly, then it's very difficult that you're going to get the movements right. So my question would be how to work with all these riders so at the same time you're working on the seat and the position. And here now we're talking about the full position of the body, not only the seat, but the legs, the elbows, the head, everything. And then at the same time, give them some possibilities as to realize that if the seat is not correct, the whole body position is not correct, then the movements are not going to come out very well. How do you approach that, and how would you work through that?
Well, first off, it is very difficult. It's a big challenge. And again, I think I said this last time that, you know, change needs to come from within. And so I always hope that when people want me to come for a clinic or want a lesson, they're really open to changing and to hearing it. One thing I can control is to show that by a good example that I work on my seat and all problems, you know, I always look to my position first, that, you know, from a very young age, it was always that it's always the rider's fault. Like a horse knows how to be a horse and a human needs to learn to become a rider. So I try to emote that in everything that I do. And, you know, a lot of times just taking the stirrups away can show the rider a little bit that when they have a little bit more freedom to move their leg, their seat, you know, gets into a better position. And so not that you trick them into, you know, doing that, but that's also something that they can repeat on their own. Something I found really interesting about Dave and his method, I'd also never heard of it before. And we worked together a little bit in Florida. And, you know, it was one of my students knows Dave. And so she had a session, and the next day she rode much better evenness in her hips. And so Dave was like, yeah, I'd love to work with you, you know, so you can see it. And what I thought, you know, was amazing about it was that it went, you know, you riddle your brain to figure out a different way to do something. So I found the Feldenkrais method really interesting and intriguing, where I was sort of like the blood, sweat, and tears program my whole life. And I just needed to figure out a better way to tell my body to do it. And so I do think helping people just see things in a different way and have an open mind about that they need to make the change in themselves. Of course, that's a giant challenge with trainers that have done things, you know, a very long time in a certain way. But usually there's a catalyst that has happened that they're seeking help, whether they have pain in their back or they just can't get the one-time tempis. And so that's always the best sign that they're looking for an answer, and we can, you know, hopefully help provide that with better equitation.
Okay, thank you. So Dave, let's go deep into this Feldenkrais method. How would you describe it? And you just let me know whenever you need the videos, and I'll try to put them on
Sure. So
on the screen.
Just to be clear, so the Feldenkrais method is something that I studied. It's not specifically for riding. So as many people ask me about that, I mentioned that earlier. But because of my own riding experience and work as a trainer and my, you know, eyes that were developed through teaching and riding, what I'm doing is based on Feldenkrais, but it's specifically for riding. So that's why it has my name on it. But anyhow, so just to talk about that, what I specifically do, like in Feldenkrais, we have two types of modes of teaching. So at the moment, we can't do the hands-on. There's a hands-on work that JJ and I worked together with that. She also attended one of my group classes. So the group classes is probably the easiest thing for me to transfer online, which I have been doing for a few years and even more now. So essentially, the group classes are not like an exercise class. We also advise our students to not, you know, look for directions. And a lot of the classes are done laying down. The reason for that is we want to take all of the work that we are used to sit up, to stand up, to organize ourselves how we do. So done laying down, we usually start with a body scan, trying to notice how your body takes contact with the ground. And as riders, I think we know this because, you know, we're used to feeling the horses and what's behind us, what's under us, and are we crooked or whatever. So just noticing without fixing is usually our baseline. And then we go through a series of small motions and we keep track of that. And usually what happens spontaneously, everybody stands up and they're taller and they're more supple and they're smiling and they feel great. Pain is gone. They ride better. The reason for that is we allow for the brain to sort of self-adjust. And to add a bit on to the question about the upper level rider. So with JJ in particular, she didn't have any problems per se. And we ended up talking and she had a lot of interest. So that interest or curiosity is hopefully the main reason that somebody wants to try this. It's not because everything hurts and I can't keep going, or my marks are bad, or I'm being told that I pull on the inside rein. But, you know, fine, there are those riders as well. But usually that group of upper level riders, many just want to be better and maybe get a competitive edge or have more feeling. They do the lunge lessons, they do all the other stuff, they eat well, they keep fit, but they want to be more supple. And this is what that will offer.
Okay, good. So, JJ, could you now describe like what is your normal training for an advanced person, a person that is already riding, let's say, not upper level dressage, but second, third level test, and when you see problems on the seat, what is your approach?
You know, first, I always want the rider to be able to tell me like 3 good things about their horses and 3 things they really struggle with. And then once we figure out what their challenges are, I break it down to explain to them how their position directly affects the horse. And so, you know, a lot of times I'll be really tough on my riders if the horse isn't bending and they just want to like pull on the inside rein and kick it, you know, and it's like, okay, whoa, you know, it starts with you. You don't have the right to get frustrated with the horse if you're not communicating that right. And so sometimes I'll even get on and show them. A lot of times I also do hands-on. I don't like take anybody off the horse or anything, but I will help them understand the position of the outside leg and how important that is. And I'll physically help them, you know, feel where that leg is supposed to be so they have a tangible feeling of, oh, that's the correct position. You know, and then I give them ways for them to remind themselves. I always say that the rider needs to be their own like self-police of, you know, first ask myself the question like, oh, what is my leg doing? Or, you know, instead of always like the horse is a master at reacting to what we're doing. And so it's always important to have the first question be, what am I doing? And so I want to give the rider an understanding of what, first become aware of what are they doing? Second, what do they need to be doing? And why do they need to do it? And so that's how we sort of break that down. And then I'll give them specific exercises to help them figure out how to put their legs, which of course affects the seat bones and the weight, so they can hopefully feel the difference that they're better position made.
Okay, Dave, and how do you approach that with your method?
So probably many of the same things. I would talk about some things that we could do while we're on our horse, whether it's in halt, and I can run people through a series of movements. So because a big piece of it is body awareness. So yes, it's biomechanics, but it's not just about, okay, let's pile this on top of each other, because it all has to talk to each other. The pieces of the bodies just have to go together and move together. And that's what makes good biomechanics. So by doing the little pieces of whatever's difficult, and of course, my eye, I'm able to see something. So at that level, you know, it's quite easy to find issues, you know, whether it's one hip that comes up or they collapse or one arm is, you know, but these usually go together. So you have to figure out quickly what's the pattern, what's the issue. Is it the eyes causing the problem? Is it, you know, one of the hips or whatever? So then you try to figure out how to do other things. And another technique we use in this work is, because it's brain riddles, you can make that problem more clear. So if somebody rides to the right with their inside rein always backwards, you first have them do more of that, of course, without hurting the horse. And they realize what they're doing, making it really clear. And now if you switch sides and you do the same thing on the other side, the brain sort of says, but this is awkward. I'm pulling on the inside rein. Because I know from my past experience trying to tell people inside hand forward, you could go blue in the face and it never stops. It just keeps happening and happening and happening. But that's because that person can't help themselves. So what I try to do is always try to get to the root of the problem and understand what is causing what, and to give the rider the opportunity to feel something new. And hopefully that happens by itself, because otherwise all the repetition reminders, that's just not my way of teaching. So that's...
Let me continue with that. Sometimes it's not, I mean, you find a rider that is aware that he's doing something wrong, but it just hurts a lot, you know? It's like, yes, I'm trying to move the leg or I'm trying to turn my body, but it just hurts so much. I mean, this especially happens when we age out. And then my question would be, do you also work or correlate this with exercises on a gym? And like, how would you work that together, you know, to make yourself, your body, once you're aware of your problem, how to make it more supple, more flexible, more independent?
Okay, so actually, I did say it is not exercise, but it is all movement based. So pain, stiffness, suppleness, all of that stuff can be attained through what I'm teaching. Of course, cardiovascular, you know, you have to be able to breathe, to keep going and all of these things. JJ and I also talked about this, and I think we share the thought that we don't want to be overly strong to ride our horses well. We have to know where our bodies are and have the middle, and please correct me if I'm wrong on your view on that. But I don't feel that to be a very good rider, you have to be overly strong. I also have a very different opinion on what a lot of people think the core is. It's often the culprit of how people hold their abdominals and their breath that makes them stiff on a horse. This actually means, you know, the hips get stiff, the back gets stiff, you can't follow, you start to pull on the reins, and, you know, there's a deeper programming that sort of goes underneath all of the surfaces based on our ancestors. Tight abdominals tell us something's wrong. So being constantly contracted in the abdominals, as many people advise, you know, in a fitness point of view, it's not what I teach at all. In fact, there should be an easy interplay between the abdominals and the flexions for everything to move with the horse, and you have this expansive quality in the horse as well. So we talk about, you know, horses not being leg movers. It's the same way that the rider has to move and be supple, and there has to be that interplay. So in terms of fitness, absolutely. If we can be fit and supple and do slow, easy movement. So other than Feldenkrais, I like Tai Chi, certain types of yoga. Have to say I'm not a big fan of Pilates in general. I've seen some exceptions. That's just not, I think it makes people stiff. Bodybuilding, probably not ideal for dressage. Some muscle training, of course, but back to the pain thing. I have to add that in being an advocate for our horses, I don't get on my horses if I feel stiff. I will get on the ground and at least I can help myself. But in my experience, it's contagious. If you're stiff and crooked and you get on your horse, absolutely your horse will be stiff and crooked. So I'm not saying don't ride if you have problems, but you have to take that responsibility. And yes, we all age and we all want to keep going with our riding. But if you know that you're very crooked and you're painful and you're stiff, be careful about, you know, putting this onto your horse. So I have to add that response. It's not something that a lot of people want to hear. But yes, if you take the time to organize everything with your body separately, you can go back to riding and you won't have a crooked or possibly lame horse.
Okay. And JJ, what would you say about fitness? And do you also work on that? I know we have here on the room, for instance, Yvonne Lawsons, who is a person that I really like a lot. She's done, in my opinion, She's the most prominent Latin American dressage rider that has gone so far. And I know she has come to teach in Colombia. And I see her on the competitions, and she's always with her professional trainer from Spain. And I think it really works because she's doing a phenomenal work. As a matter of fact, and for everybody's information, we're doing a seminar, one of these dressage talks with her next Monday for Latin America and how to grow dressage in Latin America and what's going to be the future of dressage for the Pan Am Games. But I would like to ask you about fitness and suppleness of the rider himself, because we're all the time talking about, you know, the suppleness of the horse, the elasticity of the horse. But do we really have to be and stay elastic and fit as well? What's your approach to that, JJ?
Yes. First off, hi to Yvonne. She's one of my favorite riders to watch. I love her posture. She's extremely fit. She's beautiful to watch. And so for me, that's, you know, what the sport is all about. And of course, you know, we love, like you're saying, we love our horses to be elastic and beautiful, but, you know, it really starts with us. So for me, and it's funny because I totally agree with Dave on the heavy weightlifting and the Pilates. I have not found that to be that helpful. I personally do a lot of yoga because I've had an injury in my back. I had ruptured a disc in my L5. And so there was also a time it wasn't nearly as long as Dave, but it's something, you know, I have struggled with for 20 years. And so for me, staying really supple and strong and elastic in my core is really important to protect my back. And so I do yoga every day. I work on a lot of breathing techniques, not only because I'm very focused and pretty intense and goal driven, you know, so for me, like the breathing and fully expanding my diaphragm and this ebb and flow of the suppleness inside my body has been a huge piece of the improvement of my seat. Susanna Van Dietz is who I work with mainly to improve my effectiveness in my seat. And she does something called gyrokinesis, which is, I would say it's probably a little similar to Tai Chi, where it's very slow, aware movements with the breath and finding this power within the relaxation of the body. So it isn't like, I want to go and like power lift and get stronger, because that only works with like some of the muscles and the stronger, you know, more tighter muscles. And so it's the same with running. Like everyone's like, oh, I want to get fit, I'm going to go run 5 miles. And those are actually some of the opposite muscles you need for riding. Like when you run and you contract your calf, you tighten your distance from your heel to the back of your knee, which in riding, we need that to be long and supple. And so it's interesting, like which exercises we choose to do. For me, every exercise I choose to do, I absolutely am obsessed with riding horses. So everything I do is always based on how's this going to affect my riding? Is this going to help me? You know, for me, staying elastic through a lot of yoga, really paying attention to my everyday life, how symmetrical I am. You know, am I doing the same kinds of things with my right hand? Can I do it also with my left hand? During this time of COVID-19, I've been helping in the barn and doing stalls and pulling the sides into the arena. And so for me to think about, oh, this might, you know, this might hurt my back, or I might just work the same muscles and repetition, which is of course leads always to injury. You know, I've been doing, you know, I'll do from this letter to this letter, pulling the sides in this way. And then from the next letter to the next letter, I'm going to pull the sides in the arena using this, you know, doing the opposite. So I'm a little bit obsessed about, you know, evenness in my body, and even something simple like, can I brush my teeth with both hands? You know, this ambidexterity that we ask our horses to have is something that we need to seek constantly, that balance in our own bodies. So yoga and, you know, free weights are also good, I think, in front of a mirror to make sure that you're evenly using your muscles the same. I think that can also be super helpful. But you know, motion is lotion. So I think the more we can get up and get out and find the right kind of small movements, but yet extremely intense movements, can really help the riding a lot.
Okay, I have some other people coming in. I'm asking all of you to put your microphone on mute, please. Okay, and then now I have a question for both of you. Sometimes when you're seeing horses, and this happens to me, and I will tell you a little story so that we can comment about it. I went to Germany many, many years ago. I was looking for a horse, and I remember I saw a wonderful horse. It was just amazing. And it was this little German girl riding the horse, and you're looking at the little German girl, and you say, like, well, if she can ride him, well, of course I can do it as well. And then I sat on the horse, and believe me, I went around probably once in a 20-meter circle, and then I immediately stopped. And then they said, well, you didn't like the horse? And this was kind of the end of my riding career. It's like, to be honest, I cannot sit in this horse's trot. I have to be honest. And it had so much movement that it was an amazing horse, but I could not sit on that horse. And I think people don't realize that, and everybody nowadays is looking for the wonderful moving horses. Not everybody can sit on those horses. So I remember, and I had a friend with mine, it's like, but you know, you'll handle it. And then I was saying, I was already like 50 years old at that time, 10 years ago. So I said, well, this is gonna be the end of my riding career. And I want to ride something that I can, you know, sit on. What would you say about that? I mean, when you already have your horse, it is what it is, and you have to work with that. But when you're looking for a horse, what would your comment would be?
I totally get this completely, because I have found it extremely, I ride a lot of different kinds of horses, sizes of horses. I have one amazing Connemara who's doing the International Grand Prix. Gideon is amazing, and he makes you feel like you are the world's best rider. And he's like 15 too, and I'm 5'11", so that should not go together at all. And then I have this young horse that's this, just like you said, this amazing mover, and you see it on the lunge line, or you see this little, it's part of their sales tactic to have the little German girl look perfect on it. And then it's like, I can't ride this thing one side of this thing, you know. It's amazing. I took another student to Europe, and she has an old neck fracture. And, you know, the girl rode the horse, I rode the horse, she got on it, and she took one circle, and she's like, the way this one pulls goes right to my neck, you know. So this whole idea of different conformations and how it relates to the right horse for the right person. The things I look for, number one, I want a soft back and I want a soft mouth. And the rest of it, you know, and a good character, like I want a horse that's trainable and wants to be my partner, because I can make it move really great through a lot of exercises and strength training. But if you know, many times it looks like the most incredible mover, and it's so hard in the back. And we had the same experience at one of the auctions. Our favorite horse on the video was beautiful. I got on it, I took one round, and I'm like, nope, this is not my ride. You know, and she was this beautiful horse in the catalog and on the video. And it looked great with the exercise rider too. And I got on and I'm like, nope, no, not for me. And, you know, that's why I find it amazing that people can ever luck out and buy a horse off a video, because I have to feel it. It has to let me into its movement. And it has to be pliable through the connection. I can make it move fancy, you know, but I want it to be, you know, soft and available for me.
Okay, Dave, I have a question for you from one of the participants. Sometimes there is a big rider in a very small horse, or sometimes it's the opposite. How do you work with this, and how this affect your position and your seat and everything?
Yes, so like JJ, I'm tall, I'm 6'4", and I've been showing recently a 15-3 mare. And, you know, Trakehner blood is very small and dainty, but somehow I like it. It's very easy. It's a nice break for me. She just does everything all by herself. And surprisingly, the first time I showed her, I was thinking, oh, what are people going to say? The giants on the small, tiny horse. Of course, I made sure her top line was strong enough. Figure out where the lines of force go and where am I putting my pressure. So other than that, does it just look weird? So my first show with this horse, I took her out because she was being naughty with somebody else who had been showing her. And surprisingly, a very good judge, an FEI judge, gave me a good mark and said a very well-suited pair. And I thought, really? So other than just the sizes, there is something that can be well-suited. So that, I think, would also add to the last question about, you know, it has to be well-suited. So I enjoy her. She seems to enjoy being ridden by me. And in fact, she's learning really quickly. And it may very well be that I'll keep her up the levels, even though she's tiny. I just love her. So I think it happens. Other than that, yes, of course, the other way around. Would you want a very big horse? They're harder. They keep, you know, they don't stay sound as easily. They're harder to put together, especially if they're long. But I think, yes, the overall idea is for myself, I try to match the rider and the horse as best possible. You also have to take into consideration the riding style. Where did that person learn to ride? What are their normal difficulties? Do they have limitations? What's their conformation? It's too late once you've bought the horse. If the horse, your legs don't fall the right way and it hurts you. So sure, you can change saddles and stuff, but the basic shape of the horse is very interesting to consider, how the legs can drape. Also the movement, the basic movement, as JJ pointed out, is the horse soft in the back, soft in the mouth? Can the rider really follow and be supple? And I think my biggest advice, so, you know, combining these two questions, of course, there's all different sizes, you try to match them, but matchmaking to the best of your ability and not trying to change things after, either making the mistake that, oh, well, the German girl can do it, so I'll figure it out, or, oh, that whoever was riding was lousy and I'm better. None of these things work. So just, if you like the horse and you know it and it's a really good match, great. Otherwise, there's tons of other good horses.
Yes.
Okay, I just have two questions from the audience. One is a comment, but I found it very interesting. It's Pam Doolittle saying, judges' comments and their impact on our writing. That's another topic, and I agree with that. That we could make a conference just about it. And because I would say there, at least from my experience as a writer, there are 3 marks that you always look at very carefully. One is the mark for the walk, for the, you know, for the collected and the extended walk. Then paces, when we had paces, that's one that you for sure would look at. And then your position, you know, you may skip the extended trots or the shouldering or the half passes, but once you receive your protocol, I mean, those are the marks that you see. And what you just mentioned was very important. And then I have Andrea asking, how is being tall different from being smaller in the biomechanics of the seat?
That's interesting. And I know Dave and I are both pretty tall. And, you know, he had a great story when he was learning to ride, and maybe he'll share that again. But I also struggled a lot. I think having really long limbs and a long torso, that for me has always been a challenge to keep my core strong enough. My center of balance is higher than a shorter torsoed person. So I've had to find ways to create a feeling of groundedness in my seat, as well as I have to be careful on super sensitive horses, because when I lean back, my fulcrum of my seat is a lot louder and stronger, which can sometimes help if I have a horse that's, you know, playing around with one of my students who's smaller than me and I need to make a correction or something like that. can be helpful, but I have to be really respectful on how much more power I have in my back because I'm longer. But I used to always joke when I was learning to ride that I couldn't control my legs really great because they were so far from my brain. But I know that doesn't really have anything to do with it. But yeah, it's interesting how everyone's different body shapes, and if you're long in your femur or longer in your calf, or I love to watch Stephen Peters ride. He's a dear mentor to me, and he's always like, put your hands down, and he's always like, put your hands on the wither. And I'm like, I can't. Like, if I do that, I'm like leaning forward, but he's got a very long arm compared to his torso. And so that works for him. Like, I have to ride a little bit different and respect, my body. When I was in Europe training, of course, and still to this day, Isabel Worth is like my favorite rider of all time. She's like the queen. She's amazing. But she has a very different body. She's much shorter thighs than me. And I tried my darndest to make my leg, my thigh, go as far back as hers, because she was the queen and I wanted to be great. So I need to ride it exactly like her. And I just could not get there. And there was another girl in the stable in Budapest who had a very similar body style, and she had the same exact legs. I finally was in a show in Germany and I saw Ulla Salzgeber ride. I'm like, oh, she has a much more angle to her thigh and knee. And so she has a much more similar body shape with longer legs than Isabel. So then I started to pick riders that looked like me and had the same type of proportion as me, because that was more the rider I needed to emulate than someone who had a totally different shape than me. So I found that also really helpful.
Yeah, Pam is saying, Pam that is here, is also saying we should have Debbie McDonald here. That would
yes.
be, a wonderful rider, unforgettable performances, and a completely different type of body.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so Dave, do you think we should go to some of our videos now?
Sure, absolutely.
So, but if you want to say something before
I think the last bit of information about, really, if you're wanting to figure out a way that would work for you, eventually, hopefully, you're able to listen to yourself. By that, I mean that you're not waiting for someone else to tell you that what's good for you, what's comfortable for you. Listen to yourself, listen to your horse. So that just means turn down the volume and all the rest of the clutter and pay attention within. So this has to go with the body awareness aspect and the feeling. But other than that, absolutely, yes, look for role models that look more like you. It would not make any sense, or, biomechanically, they're doing it right. So you might as well look at that. And things change from that rider. This is me here on a very big horse. One of my students riding a wonderful mare at a show. So we'll just go through this and I'll comment. This specifically, we'll talk about the trot. So we're going to talk about the lines of force and vectors in a moment. So when you look at the horse's back that's moving, you see three-dimensional movement. You might see rotation, shortening, lengthening. Here in the rider, if you think about this, is called horse stance for those of you who have martial arts experience. This filters where the movement goes, whether it's in jumping style or dressage. This is just a little snippet of a Feldenkrais movement, how you can teach coordination. This basic concept is all humans are evolved the same way based on evolution. So we have certain possibilities of movement, blueprints, and if you put it all together, it becomes easy. So here we'll look at a concept that I call vertical spring. I have it backwards, so you can see myself going up and down. If you watch the trailers behind, you can see there's quite a bit of height. The horse moves well as well, so that helps. This lady is on a trampoline to help explain how that happens without riding, and you could practice that. Here you have one of the components of trot, one dimension, sort of a rolling forward and back. Here we see this in the pelvis in slow motion, what happens. We also see it here in the skeleton, as how the rib cage comes up, the pelvis rotates forward, gets taller, shorter. This rider was asked to exaggerate that movement, so it's possible. So if you think of sitting on a clock, this is basically 12 and 6, 12 and 6. Here within my body, you can see that I've shown an X. We see these people here pushing from one foot, reaching to the other arm. These two lovely people are ballroom dancers, not riders, but they also have to deal with their bodies. They're pushing from one foot to reach into the arm. That's basically that diagonal. When we're riding, it comes from one seat bone, pushes up to the opposite shoulder, and it stays within the box. So here it's me riding, you don't see it very much, but it's there if you follow the pressure from one seat bone to the opposite shoulder. Here, because of all the dimensions of movement, we see this young rider, very nice rider. In fact, she was a working student. Here you see a pendulum. So if you watch again from behind, her pelvis swings right, left. You see the same thing in the shoulders. My little niece here, as we were talking about earlier, a little kid gets on. She's been riding since she was little. We've never pushed her, but her body follows and she's able to ride the big movers, you know, laughing, having fun. This is her when she's 10. She's developed quite a bit. This young lady here, this is a horse we found for her, we bought for her. She had been riding a pony, but because of the Feldenkrais, we were able to teach her how to follow. Here, she's a little stiff. She was an athlete, and it made her too strong. This young lady was also a working student for me, and we worked together. Her mom's her main trainer, Beatrice Boucher. She won at the Young Riders. You see a beautiful movement within her body. She's not obsessed about being perfect. We worked a bit on her shoulders this winter in Florida, but you see the hips, the swinging. If we watch again in slow motion, you have that pendulum in her pelvis. She has the alignment that we would want, but she's really following the horse, and she can turn, her neck is free, her jaw is free. She has that movement within her spine, the ankles. So that's one of the things the German FN recommends, is movement everywhere. This is an 89-year-old student of mine. She had quit riding for 40 years, used to ride Hunseat. And here we have an older horse. So it's also interesting is that keeping the biomechanics of the horse, this horse had been deemed unrideable by one of Germany's best vet clinics, and here he's 25, being ridden by a working student from Belgium. And that's also me on a rehab horse. Unfortunately, the rehab only went so far. He had an issue with the collagen levels around and this is just a class where we do some unmounted classes. And, you know, talking about being, you know, curious, looking at the skeleton. I think we can stop with the video now. It just goes on to show some images of some classes. So I think the images in movement are interesting to just develop that eye, or start to think about what is it that I'm looking for within that posture. So I never call it a position. I'm against that word. As was Moshe Feldenkrais with the idea of posture, because it's really about acture, is what he would call it. In his world, he was a martial artist. I actually had a martial art background as well before riding. The idea being that you have a middle place, you know where it is, you don't think that you're in the middle, but you're off somewhere else. So really finding your middle, and a middle where you can spontaneously move in any direction for whatever task you have. So it's a little bit more closely related to our survival in martial arts, but it's actually sitting there underneath the surface in our riding as well. So everything we do, it has something, a message that correlates in our nervous system. Are we making ourselves nervous because of the way we move? Do we breathe better? Do we feel confident? So I can't really separate the movement and the biomechanics from the emotional aspect. And, you know, this all goes together. So it's really a mind-body approach. And I know in English we have that word position, but in German it's called Sitz. So it's separate from position. So I think that's maybe another reason that little German girl rode so well, the one you talked about, is that they developed their seat. You know, they learn about biomechanics from the beginning. I remember meeting 12-year-old girls in Germany that can tell you about the footfall of the canter, backwards, you know, really knowing the training scale, upside down. So learning your theory, and then of course being trained in the right way also is that reason. So something I would like to add, that young girl that was riding the horse that I said we transitioned from, we bought that horse in Denmark. I worked with her specifically to develop her seat so she could go horse shopping. There's no point, I said to her, that we go to Europe and you can't ride the horses. I could choose a horse for her, but this is where, to find the horse that you know that's good for you, it would make sense to develop your seat, whether it's lunge lessons, Feldenkrais, or whatever. So I think all of that, bringing that all together would be important to think about.
So thank you, Dave. I have one question from myself and another question from Sarah Henderson. So Sarah is asking, you mentioned a former athlete being quoted, too strong. Is this a concern due to the resulting potential stiffness, or are there other ways that muscle density can be compromising to effective riding? And I think that's a very important question, because sometimes you get students, riders that used to do before, weightlifting or things like that. So how do you approach that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the weightlifting, that young girl, just so you know, we went shopping and she would wake up even regardless of the time zone and go run on the treadmill because she was preparing for a triathlon. So she was on the American team and she had a lovely seat, but there was so much tone to her. I understand some of this is natural. So if you think of a thoroughbred type horse, they have more tone to them. So some of this is innate, but you can change that within that horse, and you can also change that within the rider. I also think that some of the mechanical type exercises that people do that are static are not movement friendly, meaning they go more towards that position idea. So if the rider has this thing that they need to be like a post, they don't follow. So maybe it looks great in a picture, but it's terrible in a video. I'm not a judge, I can't comment on this, but I heard once that judges very quickly see things as pictures and video, and that type of idea that they have the silhouette in their mind, how it should look, but they're looking at the basic quality of movement. I think that movement piece, as I mentioned, is so important. And if someone has too much tone on them, they're going to move like that. One of the biggest culprits is in the arms. For example, people think that their arm starts and ends at the shoulder, where in fact it's connected at the clavicle. Why the arm can move so freely like that. So when you have the image in your mind, or you've been doing a lot of weightlifting that gives you that type of locomotion, you're going to use arms like that when you ride. So your shoulders and your elbows are going to want to pull. And of course, the words that go with it, shoulders back, elbows back, hands down. Unless you have a trainer that really specifically understands biomechanics or the specific bodies. So as JJ mentioned earlier, hands being down on the withers, that's not for everybody. That is the stereotypical recommendation of classical riding that was more or less made for people with my height. So we have to accommodate. But back to the idea of tension and suppleness, if the body's image tells you that you're working from the shoulder, it's going to be very different from when you move freely from the clavicle, and the shoulder blade can now slide and glide over the ribs. So you're not in your end posture. You're available to move from one place to the other, and of course not be overly, so to find that what the Germans call positive tension. I don't love the word because it still has tension, but it is positive versus negative. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, that's great. JJ, I have a question for you. And this is not at the FEI levels, but I've seen many riders that will do well while they can do rising or posting trot. Training level, first level. But when they have to go sitting trot, it's almost the end of their careers because they cannot properly sit the trot. And it's a big step for many riders and a big struggle for many riders. So what would your recommendations would be to help these riders that are struggling on how to sit the trot and be able to progress through the levels?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, that's one of the big things, especially if they're really driving their horse forward, riding it up to the contact. In first level, we want that big forward thrust in the horse's gait. But a lot of times that makes it overwhelming for us to think about being able to follow that and sit with that. So first, I loved what Dave said about tone versus tension in the body. And that when you think of how strong, like if you took like a male ballet dancer and a football player, it's like two totally different body types. And that, you know, the leaps and the amazing athletic, you know, moves that the ballet person does, it's just incredible, the strength and the suppleness that so the small intricate movements in the body can help with people that have a tendency to be like tighter and stronger and shorter muscled. So with that, you know, learning to sit the trot, I think it's important for everyone to understand that there's 3 different dimensions of the trot. So it isn't just the forward up and down part that Dave was talking about, which was such a great video to watch. You know, there's 3 different dimensions. There's the up and down, there's the forward through space, and then there's the diagonal swivel into the seat that has to happen. And if we don't follow all 3 dimensions, we end up somewhere blocking the horse. And so what I like to do is to slow the whole thing down. I like to put the horse in a little bit smaller trot and just give the rider the experience to be able to feel how their pelvis can follow in a little bit, you know, just like when you learn a new dance step, you don't put it to the music at the tempo, you know, right away. You slow it down, you break it down. Maybe you walk and then you do 20 steps of sitting trot in a slower trot, go back to walk, regroup, repeat. Because there's also, you know, specific breathing techniques that can help relax the body so you can follow a little bit better. So I like to slow the whole thing down and give the rider a chance, because it's always easy to speed it up at the end when the technique is correct. Instead of, you know, trying to ride the horse in the exact same trot, you know, it's going to be a little overwhelming. The rider's going to start bouncing out, and then the tension creeps in. And, you know, I love it, you know, I think it's Kira Kirkland who says, you must make friends with the bounce and the trot. Like, it's bouncy. It's, you know, every horse is a little bit different and some are more smooth than others. But the thing about when you get bounced out is to be able to have that tone to sort of bounce yourself back into the center, because the center is never a stagnant place. It's always full of motion. And so in order to be able to find all your different pieces of centeredness, that's where you won't get overwhelmed by the, you know, the big thing of, oh my God, the sitting trot, you know. So I like to do that.
Okay, should we go to the next video?
Sure.
Okay, so this is a video of the walk.
So since we already just looked at the trot, I think that was super what JJ was adding about the 3 dimensions, as I had mentioned as well. The movement plane and walk in the seat shows up differently. So if we watch this rider, you see more of a forward and back wiping movement. But if you watch it carefully, there's a bit of a U shape that she makes within the saddle. And that's because the horse is doing travers renvers, if I could explain it that way. So when the horse puts its right hind leg down, it shifts all of its weight there, and the tail moves that way. So even though you're going right, the horse is going to side bend right, left, left. So because of the 4 legs that we're sitting on and the tail swinging and the bend in the ribs, that's how it shows up in the rider. So if you know this, you can know if the horse is uneven, if your U shape is very uneven or very fast to the one direction. Here we see this rider. So this is another working student of mine. We did a lot of Feldenkrais, and she had only ridden the lowest levels of eventing. And with this super horse, she was winning at 3rd level in, I believe it was 4 months. Very talented, hardworking rider, but that would be my way, is that, you know, I keep everything slow, a lot of walk work, I have a sheepskin saddle all my students get to ride in to really feel the horses. And we take our time, like JJ said, but my difference is I add the Feldenkrais component, which really speeds things up. And that's why I have a course about the whole, you know, the good seat moves, because it is all about movement. So you see her ribs are soft and moving, the elbows, her leg falls. So, you know, it's easy for her, she has a nice body type for this, but you know, there is, of course, training, as everyone knows, in there. But that's very important about the following of the neck, and, you know, not to get too detailed about what a good walk is. I think most people know that. Clear forebeat, evenly, you know, spaced footfall. You could hear it on hard ground. The neck is oscillating. Not only does the neck go back and forth, the neck also makes a bit of a U shape. So there's, you know, a theme of a U shape in the rider's seat and in the neck of the horse. I think that's good.
So you want me to stop there?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we have another one. Am I still sharing there? The screen?
Not yet.
So here. So we go to the third one.
Yeah, so we'll see. There's Uta Graf riding. We'll come back to her in a second, but beautiful immediately, super stretch. So if we go towards the end of the video, there's her riding again. I did ask Uta's permission to use this video. She was very gracious about that. The reason I asked her is I think she has a beautiful, correct classical seat. You know, body type that most lady riders could relate to. And I think it's at the end of the video, her riding. And like me, she's into what we talked about, Feldenkrais. She works with a Feldenkrais practitioner in Germany once a week. And her reason was not because she felt she had a seat problem. She wanted to preserve her mobility in the hips and the lower back. So back to the question earlier about what do you do with a rider that can't sit? It's usually a question of mobility in the hip joints and the lower back, and maybe they hold their breath or hold their core too tightly or try too hard. So if you watch her, she's very smooth. You would think that this is a child riding in the smoothness, so there's that youthful quality, but of course the experience of a lifetime. She's not holding herself. You see that U shape that I was talking about, the diagonal connections if you watch the top of her head. And of course, everything is moving in all her joints, but she has that positive tone to her to support the horse. Even in stretch, there was self-carriage and a beautiful stretch at that. Thank you. That was great.
Okay. So I'm going to go to...
Dave, could you explain a little bit more about the U shape you're looking for?
Yeah, so I don't know if we'll see it as much in this rider. In the video we looked at earlier, I talked about the pendulum, so I can try to show it here. So basically, if you watch the rider's ears in a gait that has like a trot rhythm, you'll see something that shows up like this. And that's because of the pressure from the opposite seat bone, and it shows up that way. But because of that happening underneath you, it shows up with a U shape. You see it in the sternum, you see it in the head, and usually you'll see some kind of unevenness because either the horse is uneven or the rider is uneven. But if you have a keen feeling of that, you can help your horse to be more clear in the diagonal gaits, whether it's trot or piaffe passage, it shows up there. The U shape that I talked about in the walk is, of course, in the seat, and we talked a bit about the neck as well. Maybe we can rewind this so I can comment on this, or JJ, maybe you would like to just give your comments. This is just a nice video from the German FN. There's some really nice, you know, good quality basic seat, straight self-carriage in this horse. So JJ, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I just have to say, like, Uta Graf is one of my favorite riders to watch. The suppleness in her low back and her hips is just beautiful. So that I always love that video for sure. And yeah, I love when you look at, you know, this rider, and it's fun to see with her white arms of her shirt, you know, how stable her hands are and how nice and draped her legs are. You know, Charles de Comfy, my mentor, we always talk about the legs should drape around the horse's side like a warm, wet towel. And so that's, you see how her stirrup leather hangs down really quiet. And yeah, it's quite a nice, yeah, maybe her shoulders maybe move a little too much in the canter. But I really love the tone of her torso and body.
Absolutely, I agree with the shoulders as well. But the reason I chose that video is, first of all, I think that the seat shows in the horse. The horse was so correctly ridden and so straight. We saw from overhead. I really love that image. And you
Yeah.
get to see the straightness in her body, how she's not crooked, she's not twisted, and she really knows where her middle is, and therefore she can ride the horse with that tone
Yeah.
and
I
help the horse.
Yeah, and I always tell, what I loved about that video too is I always tell my students to imagine their torso like a rectangle, you know, that they're really squared up. And we always talk about like stacking the horse up on all four corners of their own feet. And so I like that image, and I thought she did a beautiful job of showing that, like, shoulders were level, elbows were level, hips and seat bones. It was a beautiful square, you know, or rectangle, you know, that she wasn't bringing her own, you know, crookedness, or her shoulder dropped, or her hip forward. It was a very neutral, squared up body, which I really appreciated that too.
Okay, so I'm gonna go to our last video.
The father of dressage, here we go.
So while we wait for the video, just a short, small video of Rainer Klimke, who, lucky for me, was the first person that I saw ride at the Grand Prix level, believe it or not, randomly. He was in Toronto with Biotop. So this video with Alaric, a lot of people have seen. You see that his abdomen is free. He was a very slim man, but that, you know, that concept of not being stiff and tight in the core. You hear this in Germany a lot, to leave the abdomen free. You hear it from Isabel, Monica, all the top trainers talk about free abdomen. Again, back with the hip movement. It's not a lot. And then, of course, how he directs. Just watch the lower leg, how it's just wiping the horse, gently touching with the biomechanics. He's touching the hair, more or less, of the horse. Because of his conformation, he can have that long drape leg with the bend in the knee. You know, and I think you'd said Ulla earlier, Zalsgaber with her body can do that. I have long legs as well. And you see just beautiful soft movement. There's turning and twisting within the shoulders and the sternum. He was a very natural rider, of course, but I don't know this for fact, but I heard that he would ask to be lunged at shows as a warm-up. I don't even know if this would be allowed these days. But I heard that that's what he used to do. He wanted to be lunged. He didn't want to do all of the Grand Prix movements all the time before a show. And similarly, within that high level quality of riding, this is something Monica Theodorescu told me, is that there was a judge from a foreign country that came to train with her dad, and he wanted to watch her lessons. And I think 3 or 4 days had passed, and he said, well, when is she going to do the Grand Prix? And the answer from Monica's father was, this is how we train. We don't drill the movements. We work on the seat, we work on the gaits, and we basically work on suppleness. So I think, to sum it up, that's the main theme. And we might see the end product. You know, JJ presented beautiful horses, or she always does, but had a win this winter in Florida. And, you know, you see a lot of beautiful, outstanding gaits and but all of the hard work underneath that is the suppling, the loose, the soft, the easy. It may be boring for some people. They want to get on with it and do the movements and want more flash. But I think anyone who understands our sport, it's a living sculpture of sorts that you're sculpting and changing, or, you know, moving and developing as an artist and an athlete. So I think that whole suppleness idea that we saw in all those riders hopefully helped.
JJ, would you like to make a comment about that?
Yeah, I thought Dave really just brought all that together in a beautiful way. And yeah, I remember being, now this is a long time ago, in '98 in Rome at the World Equestrian Games, and Eula had a beautiful stallion named Aktion, and he rode for Hungary. And whenever there was a long trip and he was preparing, like, he rode that horse without stirrups all the time. I remember seeing Kobe van Balen when she was on Olympic Pharaoh, she was riding without stirrups. And so it's interesting, like, you know, how these beautiful riders that you want to admire and you want to ride like, when you actually see all the work that goes into it behind the scenes, that we ooh and ah about the wonderful performance in the arena, but there's so much more work that's sort of the tip of the iceberg that you see at the horse show. But this giant piece of ice, you know, under the water is really where the work is. Awareness and daily management of your body and how it communicates with the horse. I think it just all, again, begins and ends there, and it's all every day a goal to be your best.
Now that you just mentioned that, I remember the question from our last failed conference, and there was a lady asking, I have a problem. It goes very well when I'm riding without stirrups, but if I put my stirrups on, then it doesn't work as well. I wish I could ride on the competitions without stirrups, but that is forbidden. So what would you say to that lady?
I had the exact same experience. I mean,
it's also happened to me, so.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, you know, at first it was hard to ride without stirrups. I went to Eula, Dalish in Hungary, and for a little bit over 2 years, I rode 2 lessons a day, 6 days a week, no lessons, or no stirrups. And then I took them back, and all of a sudden, it completely jostled my seat, and I felt twice as insecure as I had before I rode all this time without the stirrups. And so for me, what I had ignored was the suppleness of my ankle. When we think about the absorption joints of our bodies, it's the hip and the lower back and the ankle. And riding without stirrups, you never get that training into your ankle to create that supple ankle to also absorb the motion. So then I had to do a lot more, you know, stair stretches. I had to do a lot more riding in 2-point to let my ankles sort of find that suppleness and elasticity so that it didn't just go all up into my seat. So I learned also the hard way that I thought it was improving my seat so much.
Thank you. I think that was very good, and that is very helpful, because I also know that there are some other people watching this that have that problem. And Dave, there is a question from the chat. It's Pam Doolittle asking, I understand the idea of the U in gaits like walk and trot because of the symmetry. How does this change in canter? What letter is the seat making? So used to say good training is like growing grass.
So the canter, you know, like I said, the kids who can tell you the footfall, I think that's a very important thing to start with, is that some people are not sure and clear on what the footfall is or hind leg starts the canter. So sometimes I'm disappointed working with upper level riders that tell me it's the inside hind leg that starts the canter. It seems like a very basic information that 12-year-old children should tell. And I don't mean this in a condescending way, but to be informed of the basic gaits and what the differences are is really important, because you have no idea then what's supposed to come through your body. So if we want to talk about it, normally the main way to explain this is a spiral, that the movement comes through you through a spiral. And the reason a spiral is so important, you see a spiral within almost every sport. So to make it very simple, you see someone playing golf or baseball, they'll push with one foot. So that's the forces coming through them. That's the theme that we have as well, the forces coming through you. But then it gets filtered into a spiral. So lucky for us, our nervous systems know what to do with this information and what amount of tone and what spirals, what doesn't spiral. A lot of people with lower back problems think that their lower back twists and spirals. Those vertebrae don't do that. The lower back basically has this movement to it, a flexion and extension. So what feels like a twist is just a side bend in that first part. And then from the lower back upwards, there's that ability to spiral and twist. So that's then you might have the spiraling coming through the leg. So when you have your positioning of the canter, normally the outside leg back, the inside leg forward, that positioning alone will turn the abdomen towards the outside. So again, for basic information, that's not always available, but mostly most people in Germany are taught that you keep your abdomen facing the outside and the shoulders to the inside. So there's this spiral seat. So somewhere something has to transition. So it's not everything turned to the inside as you would in a shoulder in. And that allows for that spiral. Again, talking about the box that JJ talked about, this is our image that we keep things neat and tidy. We stay over the center that's moving and dynamic, but it's within a box, or another way to look at it is a cylinder, 3-dimensional, but it's still this box rectangular type shape. And that's basically what happens, is why the inside seat bone is able to scoop, and why we have to follow with the inside hand, because that moment where we all hate taking pictures in the canter where the neck is really low, the horse has to swing its neck back up and uses, again, a U type of shape, pendulum type shape to do that. And if you're pulling on the inside rein or blocking, you make the outside hind leg go further and further back. So sadly, years ago, I was visiting a show in Holland, and one of their top riders was riding, pulling on the inside rein. I'm sorry if I offend people, but I have to say this, biomechanically, they were destroying the canter. And then when they did a halt transition and outside hind leg was all the way back there and the horse got a whip, that's where the rider needs a whip. You know, so I'm again, sorry to offend anybody if I mentioned the specific country. That wasn't my point. But you can't ride against the basic biomechanics. That's just, it's there. It's in all the horses. It's within us. This is what makes classical riding. We ride in a biomechanically friendly / horse friendly, because it doesn't make any sense. There is a science to it. So yeah, the canter, more or less, but you have to know what's happening, what is happening, how do you influence the moment of suspension, and then of course all the regular dressage stuff. How do we make the horse straighter? How do we make the horse more supple? How do we bring the inside hind leg more forward, or to carry, or to push? All of these ideas are back there, but they're easier when it's happening.
Okay, we have taken more than the hour than we expected, but the conversation was really interesting. JJ, would you like to make some final comments, and then I'll give you the floor again, Dave, for you to finish?
Sure. I really want to just thank you, Cesar, so much for having me. And it's always a pleasure to talk with Dave as well. Yeah, I hope everyone out there knows that we can all become the best version of ourselves, and awareness and balance and fitness with our bodies can always help our horses. And so I hope everyone out there, works on how they can, influence their horses better. And I wish everybody some great rides.
Thank you very much for joining us and for all your wonderful comments. I really enjoy it a lot.
There's so much.
Yes.
Final comments?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Cesar, for having me here, and a pleasure to be here with JJ. And I always love chatting with her. And we've not known each other very long, but immediately I knew this is somebody that has the same ideas of correct training. And not that a lot of people don't want to do well, but I really admire and appreciate the way she's working with her horses and her ideals and her objectives, and how she goes about training her riders. So yeah, absolutely wonderful to chat with her always. And thank you everybody who's come to listen today, and for the wonderful questions. And the same thing that I would like to encourage everyone is to believe that you can be your best version of yourself. So you're not limited to I'm stiff, I'm this, I'm that, or even if you're already an Olympic rider, maybe you want to go for a medal. I know there's a lot of ideas, oh, the horse is not this, and I don't have enough money. But what you do have is the ability to ride your best and develop yourself. And while we're all at home, there's so many things you can do. You can read, you can sit on a ball and bounce and spring and look at the mirror. I've heard of people putting saddles on top of moving stools. You can do these types of things. I've done all these things myself, and I've been made fun of as well, that, oh my God, it's Saturday night and you're looking in the mirror, bouncing up and down. Yes, we're obsessed, and that's just how it is. Other than that, I would encourage anyone who's interested. I have some free information for some of my home-based learning on my website. There wasn't time, of course, to teach anything like that today, but you can check that out on my website. It's davethinmethod.com. So thank you.
Great. So thank you very much. Before we finish, I just have to say that I was very nervous today, because all the time I was worried that somebody was going to jump in the middle of, you know, we would have some hacker or something, but thanks God that never happened. And I think the idea of keeping the passwords and the links private will work. So for the next Dressage talks, we'll do the same. We'll keep the links private. And I think this really worked well. And thank you very much, everybody, for attending. See you next Monday. Then I remind everybody we will have Yvonne Lozos de Muñiz, which everybody knows. And we also will have Cesar Hirsch from Venezuela. He's a very famous FEI steward and jumping judge. And we're going to talk about what is going to happen with the Pan Am Games. What level are we going to ride them at? At the moment, you know that we have a combination of small tour and Grand Prix. And this is a qualifier for the Olympics, but there have been some conversations at the FEI level whether or not they should move to the Grand Prix level, or if we should have a medium tour in between. And of course, Latin America has to prepare for that. So that will be the topic of that conversation. And I hope you can all join us for that as well. So that will be Monday in the afternoon. So 7 o'clock Florida time, 6 p.m. Bogota, Lima time. And I didn't do it earlier for the Europeans because I would imagine this is mostly more interesting for the Latin American and American riders. So thank you very much again. It was a great audience and I had a lot of fun and I learned a lot. Thank you very much and bye everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
According to the lyrics to the 1981
So
song,
now everybody is unmuted.
Thank you.
Hi, Cesar. Thank you.